Do you remember those everyday 1990s things? So normal then, but shocking to realize they're illegal now? In the 90s, those habits and freedoms shaped daily life, from how we parented to the risks we never thought twice about. What does it say about us that ordinary joy turned into outlawed memory? Smoking in hospital waiting rooms in the 1990s feels almost impossible to imagine today. Families sat shoulder to shoulder on plastic chairs while cigarettes burned in ashtrays beside them. The smell of smoke clung to the walls, the curtains, and even the nurses' scrubs. Parents puffed nervously as they waited for test results. Grandparents lit one after another while children coughed quietly in the corner. At the time, it felt normal. Smoking was part of everyday life, from restaurants to airplanes, so why not hospitals too? Doctors and nurses themselves were often smokers, stepping outside for a quick break before coming back inside. The haze in the air was just another background detail, like the hum of the vending machine or the squeak of rubber soles on tile floors. What made it so shocking is that hospitals were places meant for healing, yet smoke filled the very rooms where people came for help. Families did not question it because cigarettes were still tied to stress relief and social bonding. Looking back, it is hard to believe how acceptable it was to light up in the middle of a space where children and the sick were waiting. It was a time when convenience and habit outweighed concern, and no one thought twice. Cars without child safety locks were the reality for every family road trip in the 1990s. Kids piled into the back seat, doors clicking shut with nothing more than a thin latch between them and the road flying by outside. Parents yelled warnings, "Do not touch that handle!" But trust was all they had. Children leaned against doors, sometimes fiddling with locks just to hear the sound, while mothers and fathers gripped the wheel a little tighter. Long drives meant restless legs and curious hands, and everyone knew one mistake could send a door swinging open. Yet families accepted the risk, believing that keeping an eye on the kids was enough. Station wagons and sedans carried siblings, cousins, and neighbors with no extra restraints, just windows rolled down and music playing on the radio. Childhood freedom meant moving around, reaching for toys on the floor, or pressing against glass to wave at passing cars. Parents sighed in relief every time a trip ended without a scare, never realizing that simple technology would one day prevent those near misses. It was normal then, ordinary even, but today it feels reckless. Safety locks turned what was once a parent's constant worry into something we take for granted. Teachers driving students home without paperwork was once seen as a kindness. A teacher noticed a child standing alone after practice, asked where they lived, and offered a ride without a second thought. Parents appreciated it, waving from porches as their kids hopped out of the car, grateful for the gesture. In the 1990s, trust in teachers was absolute. They were not just educators, but guardians of children's well-being. After-school rides felt natural, the kind of small-town courtesy that built community ties. Students climbed into back seats cluttered with grading papers or sports gear, laughing and chatting while their teacher asked about homework or the upcoming game. No one thought about liability forms or background checks. It was assumed that every teacher was safe. Today, those same actions would require phone calls, signed documents, and strict oversight. Back then, it was simple. Adults cared, and they helped. The memory is warm, even if modern caution has erased it. Teachers were trusted with much more than lessons, and that trust shaped childhoods in ways rules cannot replicate. Paying with checks at the grocery store was one of the slowest rituals of the 1990s. Customers pulled out checkbooks, balanced pens on counters, and carefully wrote the date, the amount, and the store name. A line of shoppers grew behind them, shifting impatiently while frozen goods melted in carts. Cashiers waited for signatures to match IDs, stamping each check with a loud clunk before sliding it into a drawer. For families, writing a check was a sign of responsibility. It showed you managed your money and tracked your spending. Kids watched their parents scratch ink across paper, learning the process long before they ever had a bank account. Some stores even allowed you to write a check for a little more than the total, handing you cash back at the register. It was everyday life, even if it slowed everything down. Today, with swipes and taps, the idea of handwriting a payment feels old-fashioned. But in the 1990s, checks were as common as coupons, a normal part of every trip to the store. Cafeterias serving peanut butter sandwiches daily was a routine no one thought twice about. Trays slid across metal rails, and kids picked up peanut butter and jelly sandwiches wrapped in plastic or stacked on plates. It was cheap, filling, and loved by almost everyone. Sometimes schools even made giant pans of peanut butter and jelly, slicing them into squares so they could feed an entire grade in one go. Kids remember the way the bread stuck to the roof of your mouth, forcing you to grab a carton of milk to wash it down. For many families, it was one of the only guaranteed meals that children could rely on 5 days a week. The rich smell of roasted peanuts drifted across the lunchroom, mixing with the sound of laughter and shouts. Parents saw it as reliable protein, schools saw it as easy to prepare, and kids saw it as comfort food. Allergies were rarely discussed, and no one worried about cross-contamination. Children traded halves with friends, added chips inside for crunch, or saved them for after-school snacks. Peanut butter was everywhere, spread on crackers, stirred into cookies, or served with celery sticks. Happiness was simple, and it came in the form of sticky hands and full bellies. Today, with allergy bans in place, it is hard to believe peanut butter once ruled the cafeteria. For an entire generation, though, it was the taste of school lunch. Bike hitch rides on the back of cars were a dangerous thrill that kids in the 1990s chased without hesitation. Snowy streets or icy neighborhoods became playgrounds when children grabbed onto a bumper and let a car pull them along. Boots scraped against slush, laughter echoed, and every bump sent hearts racing. It was especially popular after school when neighborhoods were covered in fresh snow and kids dared each other to see who could hold on the longest. Drivers often pretended not to notice, but some slowed down on purpose to give kids a smoother ride. The unspoken rule was to let go before the car sped up, though not everyone followed it. Parents scolded kids who got caught, but more often than not, the thrill was too tempting. Friends dared each other to hold on longer, to go faster, to see who could make it the farthest. It was reckless fun, done without helmets or planning, just the raw energy of childhood daring. Drivers sometimes knew and let it happen. Other times, kids clung on secretly, grinning through clouds of exhaust. The risk was enormous, but in the moment, it felt like magic, flying down streets powered by nothing but nerve. Looking back, it is shocking anyone thought it was normal, yet for kids then, it was just another way to turn a snowy day into adventure. Junk food vending machines in schools were a highlight of every lunch break. Hallways glowed with the red lights of soda machines and the hum of candy dispensers. For a few quarters, students could buy chips, chocolate bars, or fizzy drinks, turning the school day into something a little sweeter. The machines often jammed, leading to desperate shakes and kicks from frustrated kids who wanted their candy bar to drop. Some students memorized which buttons to press lightly so the machine would drop 2 items instead of 1. The thrill of beating the machine was almost as sweet as the sugar itself. Teachers frowned, parents sometimes complained, but kids celebrated the freedom. Lunch money often disappeared into those machines, leaving trays of vegetables untouched in the cafeteria. The buzz of soda cans cracking open mixed with laughter in hallways, fueling afternoons with sugar highs. It was cheap, easy, and fun, which made it part of the culture of growing up. No one worried about calories, caffeine, or nutrition. Snacks were just snacks. The machines became gathering spots where friends compared choices or shared bites. Today, strict nutrition rules would never allow it, but in the 1990s, vending machines were part of the fabric of school life. Chain smoking at Little League games was as common as the crack of bats and the cheer of parents. Bleachers filled with smoke while kids ran bases under the watchful eyes of mothers and fathers puffing Marlboros. Coolers rattled with sodas, concession stands sizzled with hot dogs, and the air smelled of grass mixed with tobacco. It was not unusual to see a coach pacing the dugout with a cigarette hanging from his lips while shouting instructions. Parents swapped lighters as often as they shared cheers, creating a cloud that hovered over the field from first pitch to last inning. The smoke was just another layer of atmosphere, blending into the memories of summer evenings and dusty diamonds. Parents cheered, argued with umpires, and shouted advice through clouds of smoke. Children hardly noticed. It was just part of the atmosphere. Coaches smoked in dugouts, fans smoked in stands, and no one batted an eye. It was a community event, built around kids but flavored by adult habits. Today, the thought of lighting up at a children's game feels shocking, even rude. Back then, it was normal, another layer of everyday life. Happiness came from the game, the laughter, and the togetherness, even if smoke drifted over every inning. Riding in the rear-facing seat of station wagons was a rite of passage for kids in the 1990s. The seat folded up from the trunk, facing the traffic behind, and turned every drive into entertainment. Children made faces at drivers, waved at strangers, and laughed as cars honked back. There were no seatbelts, no airbags, just vinyl cushions and the thrill of freedom. Parents loved it too. It kept kids busy on long trips, giving them something to do besides fight in the back seat. Families drove for hours, station wagons packed with luggage, snacks, and siblings. Looking out the back window felt like watching a private movie, the road unrolling in reverse. It was unsafe, but no one thought much about it. Today it seems unthinkable, but for a generation of kids, the rear-facing seat was pure magic. Plastic grocery bags as lunch bags were as ordinary as pencils and notebooks. Parents packed sandwiches, apples, and chips into the same bags that carried groceries the night before. Children walked to school swinging those thin handles, sometimes with names scribbled in marker. The bags crinkled loudly as kids dug inside at lunch, pulling out foil-wrapped peanut butter sandwiches and thermoses of soup. Friends compared lunches, traded snacks, and tied knots in empty bags to make balloons. No one worried about safety, suffocation, or recycling. It was just how things were done. Lunchboxes existed, but plastic bags were free, simple, and everywhere. The habit filled classrooms and cafeterias with the sound of rustling plastic, a soundtrack to childhood afternoons. Today, parents worry about sustainability and safety, but in the 1990s, the plastic bag was the most reliable lunch carrier around. Climbing trees in public parks without supervision was the kind of reckless freedom that defined the 1990s. Kids raced to the highest branch, legs dangling, shoes slipping on bark, with no adult anywhere in sight. Parks were open spaces filled with metal slides that burned in the sun and monkey bars that left palms blistered, but the real challenge was always the trees. Children scrambled up with no helmets, no harnesses, just pure determination. Parents dropped kids off in the morning and trusted they would figure it out. Falls happened. Scraped knees were constant, but no one thought of lawsuits or warning signs. Instead, adults saw it as a part of growing up, learning your limits, testing your courage, and sometimes limping home with a story. The tallest branches became clubhouses, pirate ships, or secret forts where friends whispered plans and looked out over the park below. The rough bark left scratches, but the view from the top made every sting worth it. Cities did not fence trees or post rules. They trusted children with risk in a way we do not anymore. Today, climbing a tree in a public park often earns a whistle from security or a worried call from a stranger. Back then, it was an everyday adventure, proof that childhood was about discovery, not protection. Kids learned balance, bravery, and imagination among those branches. The park was not just a playground built from steel and wood. It was alive, and children had full permission to conquer it. Chalk dust clouds in classrooms were a constant part of school life in the 1990s. Teachers clapped erasers together outside, sending white plumes into the air that drifted back through open windows. Kids often volunteered for the job, thrilled to smack erasers against brick walls and watch the chalk explode into smoky clouds. The dust-coated hair, clothes, and hands sticking to everything it touched. Students drew pictures on desks, scraped initials into boards, and ended up covered in white streaks by the end of the day. Teachers breathed it in daily, brushing it off their skirts or sleeves as if it were nothing. Back then, no one worried about particles in the air or the health risks of constant exposure. Classrooms had a haze, chalk trays overflowed, and every lesson ended with squeaks and dust floating in the sunlight. Children sneezed, coughed, and laughed at the clouds they created, never realizing the risks. Today, with dry erase boards and smart screens, the idea of children inhaling chalk dust all day feels irresponsible. But in the 1990s, it was just part of the rhythm of learning. Teachers stacked erasers high, children carried chalk-stained hands home, and every blackboard cleaning turned into a mini-storm of white. Chalk dust was messy, imperfect, and in its own way comforting. It was the smell and sight of school, unforgettable to anyone who grew up in that time. Dogs riding loose in the backseat or the bed of a pickup truck were symbols of loyalty and freedom in the 1990s. Families piled into cars with pets hopping in last, tails wagging, nails scratching against upholstery. Windows rolled down, and dogs stuck their heads out, ears flapping, tongues flying in the wind. In pickup trucks, they stood tall in the open bed, surveying highways like kings of the road. No one used harnesses, seatbelts, or crates. Pets were treated like passengers, free to roam wherever they pleased. Parents laughed as dogs scrambled from seat to seat, while kids fought to keep their spot from being stolen. It was normal to pull up at a red light and see a dog in the back of a truck, eyes sparkling, fur blowing. Dangerous? Absolutely. But people saw it as joyful, part of the bond between families and their animals. Accidents happened, but they were shrugged off, blamed on bad luck rather than the lack of restraints. Today, laws require harnesses, barriers, or carriers to keep pets safe. Back then, the open window was a gift, a chance for a dog to taste the wind and for families to feel like they were giving them happiness. It was risky, but it was love, expressed in the freedom to ride along, head first into the breeze. Buying cigars or cigarettes for parents was a task many kids of the 1990s knew by heart. Moms or dads scribbled a note or gave simple instructions. Tell them it is for me. Corner stores and gas stations sold them without hesitation, sliding packs of Marlboros or Swisher Sweets into small hands. Kids stood on tiptoe to hand over crumpled bills, proud to run an errand that felt grown up. Clerks rarely questioned it, often greeting children by name and chatting as they bagged the tobacco. It was not unusual to see a 10-year-old carrying a carton down the street, swinging it casually like groceries. Parents trusted their kids not to sneak one, though some inevitably did. The smell of smoke clung to kitchens and living rooms, so buying cigarettes was just another chore, like grabbing milk or bread. Today, strict age checks and scanning systems make that impossible. Back then, it was a trust-based system, built on community and familiarity. Kids learned early the brand their parents liked, the difference between menthol and regular, and how to count change correctly. The memory now feels shocking, but it was once so ordinary that no one blinked. Childhood included errands that would raise eyebrows today, proof of how much freedom and risk was taken for granted. Rollerblading on busy streets was a trend that blurred the line between play and danger. Teens strapped on skates and rolled alongside cars, weaving between traffic without helmets, pads, or second thoughts. The clack of wheels on pavement echoed as kids pushed for speed, arms swinging, hair flying back. Parents sometimes shouted warnings from porches, but most shrugged and let them go. Streets were playgrounds, and the thrill of skating in the open lane was irresistible. Groups of friends rolled in packs, laughing, racing, daring each other to cut closer to the curb or ride longer stretches without stopping. Intersections became stages for tricks, jumps, and near misses. Falls were common, knees scraped raw, but the rush was worth it. Rollerblading was freedom, the kind of unfiltered joy that ignored risk. Cars honked, drivers cursed, but kids just laughed louder. Today, strict rules and protective gear make the memory almost unbelievable. Back then, asphalt was the rink and adrenaline was the ticket. Happiness came from speed, risk, and the unshakable belief that nothing bad would happen. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also the essence of growing up in the 1990s, reckless, carefree, and unforgettable. Sharing a single water fountain at school was as common as lining up for recess. Kids crowded in hallways, each taking a turn, mouths pressed against the same metal spout. Teachers shouted to hurry, while friends pushed from behind, splashing water across shirts and shoes. Hygiene was barely considered. Everyone drank from the same fountain, coughing, laughing, and spitting as they went. During flu season, the line did not stop, and no one thought about germs spreading from one child to another. Some kids hogged the fountain, sipping slowly while others begged for a turn. Fights broke out, rules were made, 5 seconds only, but the fountain remained the same. Parents never worried, schools never sanitized, and children never thought twice. Today, strict health standards and individual water bottles have replaced the ritual. Back then, it was part of school life, one more messy, imperfect system that somehow worked. The memory is not just of thirst quenched, but of the camaraderie, the impatience, and the shared experience of waiting in line. The fountain was more than water. It was a symbol of childhood routine, now unthinkable in an age of constant caution. Using pay-per-view boxes without digital locks was a quiet rebellion in the 1990s. Cable systems relied on simple devices, black boxes that unlocked channels for a fraction of the cost. Families whispered about which neighbor had one, passing along tips for hookups and wiring. Suddenly, wrestling matches, boxing events, and premium movies played in living rooms without anyone paying full price. Kids bragged at school about what they had watched, slipping spoilers into conversations with friends who could not afford the real thing. The boxes were small, often hidden behind televisions, but their impact was huge. For parents, it felt like beating the system, stretching tight budgets while keeping families entertained. Cable companies complained, but enforcement was rare, and many households treated it as harmless. Today, digital encryption makes such hacks nearly impossible. But back then, it was widespread, a cultural wink shared by neighbors and friends. It was not about crime, it was about access, about enjoying what seemed just out of reach. Families gathered on couches, cheering or laughing, never thinking much about legality. It was a time when rules bent easily, and entertainment felt like something worth bending them for. Passing out flyers on car windshields was an everyday sight in parking lots during the 1990s. Malls, movie theaters, and grocery stores filled with rows of cars, each windshield tucked with colorful paper ads. Kids handed them out for part-time jobs, businesses spread promotions, and community groups announced events. Drivers returned to find their wipers holding invitations to concerts, fundraisers, or local pizza deals. People grumbled at the clutter, but most glanced at them before tossing them aside. It was legal, cheap, and effective, which made it popular. Streets and lots sparkled with fluttering papers on windy days, litter that was accepted as part of the culture. Today, ordinances and property rules have banned it, citing trash and nuisance. Back then, flyers were a lifeline for small businesses and grassroots efforts. Communities thrived on word of mouth, and a flyer on your car meant you were invited into the mix. For kids, it was a first job, walking rows of cars and slipping paper under wipers. For adults, it was just part of daily life. The memory lingers because it shows how simple promotion used to be. Hands, paper, and persistence, nothing more. Playing in construction sites was one of the most dangerous but common childhood pastimes of the 1990s. Half-built houses, piles of lumber, and mounds of dirt became playgrounds after workers left for the day. Kids climbed scaffolding, balanced on beams, and raced bikes through unfinished lots. Nails, glass, and heavy equipment scattered everywhere, but children treated it like adventure, not danger. Parents sometimes scolded them, but rarely stopped them. Construction sites were just part of the neighborhood. Friends met after school, sneaking through fences or climbing over barriers, daring each other to go higher or deeper. The smell of fresh wood, the echo of empty rooms, and the thrill of exploring what was off-limits made it irresistible. Today, strict security and lawsuits have shut down that kind of freedom. Back then, it was normal, another wild part of growing up. Children learned bravery, caution, and creativity among stacks of bricks and dirt piles. Looking back, it is a miracle more accidents did not happen. But the memories remain sharp. The danger made it exciting, and the excitement made it unforgettable. Gas cans with no child-proof caps were an overlooked hazard in nearly every 1990s garage. Red plastic containers sat beside lawnmowers, bicycles, and toys, the scent of gasoline filling the air. Kids played nearby, often touching or even opening the cans without resistance. Parents stored them casually, thinking nothing of the risk. The caps twisted easily, no locks, no warnings, just a splash of liquid fuel waiting inside. Children grew up knowing the smell, watching their parents pour gas into mowers or cars, sometimes even holding funnels to help. No one imagined the danger of spills, fires, or poisoning. Today, regulations require locks, safety caps, and strict storage rules. Back then, it was ordinary, invisible, part of daily life. The sight of a gas can was no more concerning than a rake or a basketball. It is shocking now to think how much trust was placed in children's restraint. But the 1990s were filled with those casual risks, small details of home life that seem reckless only in hindsight. Families accepted hazards without blinking, and somehow, most kids made it through. The garage, cluttered and unprotected, was just another room of adventure, even with danger hiding in plain sight. School field trips without permission slips were once a normal part of childhood, and parents often found out only when their kids came home with stories of the day. A teacher might decide on a whim to take the class to a nearby park, museum, or even a fire station, and no one thought twice about it. Children piled into buses or sometimes even walked in groups, with the only notice to parents being an excited retelling over dinner. In the 1990s, trust in schools and teachers was so strong that the idea of needing multiple forms, signatures, and emergency contacts for every outing simply did not exist. Teachers carried a basic first aid kit, reminded kids to stick together, and called it good enough. The trips themselves were thrilling for children precisely because they felt unexpected. Suddenly, a math lesson was replaced with fresh air and adventure. Parents rarely complained. Many saw it as a bonus that their children got experiences outside the classroom. Today, rules demand detailed permission slips, liability waivers, and emergency contact lists before a bus even leaves the parking lot. Back then, spontaneity was still allowed, and that freedom gave kids a sense of excitement that planned forms cannot capture. It was imperfect, even risky, but it made school feel less like routine and more like discovery. Carrying matches as kids seems shocking now, but in the 1990s it was oddly common. Restaurants handed out collectible matchbooks with logos printed on the covers, and children often pocketed them like trading cards. Matchbooks piled up in junk drawers, glove compartments, and backpacks, treated as harmless souvenirs instead of dangerous fire starters. Kids swapped them at school, compared designs, and kept their favorites tucked away like treasures. Parents rarely objected, since matches were everywhere, and smoking was still normalized in daily life. The danger was obvious, but trust was higher, and families believed kids knew better than to light them. Of course, accidents happened. Tiny burn marks on sidewalks, singed paper in backyards, but the culture accepted it as part of childhood experimentation. Today, giving matches to a child would raise alarms, but in the 1990s it was just another casual detail of growing up. Collecting those little cardboard books made children feel older, included in a world that was not fully theirs yet. The innocence of treating matches like souvenirs hides the reality that safety was left almost entirely up to chance. Leaving bikes unlocked downtown was once so ordinary that no one thought twice about leaning a bicycle against a storefront and walking away. Kids rode into town, tossed their bikes against walls or trees, and returned hours later expecting them to still be there. Sometimes they were gone, but even then, the theft felt like bad luck, not inevitability. In the 1990s, laws and expectations around security were relaxed, and small towns especially operated on trust. A lock was optional, not mandatory, and many children did not even own one. The freedom was part of the charm, jumping off your bike to grab a soda or comic book without worrying about chains or keys. Parents encouraged independence, even if it came with risks, and communities still believed in the honesty of neighbors. Today, the idea of leaving a bike unattended feels reckless, but then it was simply practical. A child's bike was their passport to freedom, and rules did not slow that down. It was a time when convenience outweighed caution, and children learned both responsibility and risk from it. Food courts, allowing indoor smoking, created a haze that mixed with the smell of French fries, pizza, and fried chicken. In the 1990s, malls were social hubs, and families gathered in food courts to eat while clouds of cigarette smoke drifted from table to table. Ashtrays sat on plastic tables filled with smoldering butts, while parents lit up over trays of burgers and sodas. Children ate nuggets or slices of pizza with smoke curling in the air, coughing occasionally but not complaining. It was just how things were. Signs marked smoking and non-smoking sections, but the separation was meaningless. The haze spread everywhere. For adults, smoking during a meal was as natural as sipping coffee, and no one blinked at lighting up indoors. Today, the idea is nearly unthinkable, but back then, malls encouraged it with designated spaces and cheap ashtrays. The food, the chatter, and the smoke blended into one memory, making malls feel like a mix of indulgence and grit. Kids might not remember the taste of the food as much as the smell of tobacco that clung to their jackets. It was accepted, normal, and strangely comforting, even though it left everyone reeking by the time they got home. Parents letting kids ride in the trunk area of SUVs was considered the fun seat, long before safety laws banned it. On family road trips, siblings argued over who got to sit in the back, stretched out with pillows, snacks, and toys. The trunk space had no seatbelts, no airbags, just carpet and windows that made it feel like a private clubhouse on wheels. Kids waved at passing cars, sprawled on sleeping bags, and played games while their parents drove without worry. The freedom was exhilarating, giving children a sense of adventure while still being part of the family car. Parents trusted that the ride would be safe, and kids loved the novelty of sitting somewhere that felt off-limits. Today, laws and safety campaigns would never allow it, but in the 1990s it was common enough to be a childhood memory for many. Looking back, it was dangerous, yet it symbolized the era's looser rules and trust in fate. The trunk seat was both a risk and a joy, a reminder that childhood once had more room for freedom. Mood rings were not just accessories, they were wearable mysteries. You slipped one on, and suddenly your emotions had color. Blue for calm, green for average, black for something intense, or maybe just cold fingers. In the 1970s, mood rings exploded into popularity, sold at mall kiosks, toy stores, and head shops. They were groovy and cosmic, a mix of science and magic. For kids, they were fun. For teens, they were romantic. For adults, they were a conversation starter. It was like having a secret you could wear. Even if the science was shaky, the feelings were real. You looked down, saw a shimmer, and wondered, am I really feeling what the ring says I am? Or is the ring just feeling what I am not ready to admit? It was silly, but it was intimate. And in a time when everyone was learning to express themselves in new ways, a ring that responded to you felt like the perfect symbol. They came and went, like a trend riding a lava lamp wave. But some people never forgot the moment the ring turned violet and their heart raced a little faster. Why did a $5 trinket feel like it understood us better than we understood ourselves? She was always there, watching over the bathroom like a guardian of dignity and decorum. A porcelain head, maybe with painted lashes and a tiny smile peeking out from the top of a wide crocheted dress. Underneath that ruffled skirt, an emergency roll of toilet paper, hidden in plain sight. These toilet paper dolls were a hallmark of mid-century bathrooms, especially in homes with a certain flair for tradition. You did not just keep spare rolls visible, you dressed them up. Sometimes they were handmade with love, sometimes bought from a local craft fair, and sometimes they came from catalog orders with matching sets. They were oddly formal, oddly whimsical, and completely accepted. But as homes became more modern and bathroom designs leaned toward minimalism, these quirky guardians began to disappear. People wanted sleek lines, not frilly surprises. The dolls were packed away, given away, or just forgotten. Today, you might stumble across one in a secondhand shop, her skirt a little dusty, her smile unchanged. And in that moment, you remember a different kind of bathroom, one that was personal, playful, and just a little bit strange. Because once upon a time, hiding your toilet paper was not about shame. It was about style. The promise of modular furniture was simple: flexibility, creativity, and smart design for small spaces. What we got instead was a collection of flimsy particle board pieces that wobbled with every move. These were the stackable shelves, folding tables, and interchangeable couch systems that dominated catalogs in the 1970s. And on paper, they made sense. Custom configurations, easy to rearrange, and light enough to move around by yourself. But there was a reason they were light. They were also fragile. The locking mechanisms broke, the cheap finishes peeled, and what looked cool in the store rarely held up under the daily wear of real life. Coffee tables would sag in the middle. Bookshelves leaned like tired soldiers. Even the stylish-looking modular couches were uncomfortable and awkward to clean. Some homeowners embraced the idea at first, charmed by the sense of innovation. But over time, the frustration set in. The dream of flexible living turned into a house full of disposable furniture. And if the modular design failed to impress, the next status symbol at least came with its own built-in glamour, until nobody wanted it anymore. Smoking was everywhere in the 1980s. Not just on sidewalks or street corners, but inside diners, airplanes, grocery stores, even hospitals. Ashtrays were bolted to fast food tables. The clink of ice in a glass mixed with the flick of a lighter. Office meetings were held through a fog of cigarette smoke. Passengers lit up at 30,000 feet in a sealed cabin, and nobody said a word. There were smoking sections in restaurants, but no real barriers. Just a vague separation by aisle or air vent. It was part of the scenery, part of the culture. But today, smoking indoors is banned in most public spaces across the United States. What once symbolized adulthood now reads as a health hazard. But at the time, it was just background noise, something that hung in the curtains and clung to your coat. And if the air in those spaces was thick with smoke, it was also filled with something else that seems almost unbelievable now: medicine sold without oversight. There was nothing quite like running full speed across your backyard and hurling yourself headfirst onto a wet sheet of plastic. The slip and slide was a symbol of childhood joy, until it was not. The idea seemed simple. Spray some water, roll out the slide, and dive. But no one ever talked about the cracked ribs, or the neck injuries, or the kids who slammed into the ground like human missiles, because the slide was only as safe as the ground underneath it. Uneven lawns, rocks hiding under the surface, tree roots waiting like traps. And if you were a teenager, or worse, an adult, your weight turned every dive into a high-velocity disaster. The company even had to issue warnings not to let older kids use it. But that came later. In the 1980s, everyone dove. No helmets, no supervision, just laughter and the occasional scream. Hospitals saw a surge in summertime injuries tied directly to these plastic torpedoes. But still, every kid wanted one. It was cheaper than a pool and promised the thrill of reckless speed. You did not care about the bruises until the next day. You just wanted to fly. Looking back, it feels like we turned backyards into danger zones on purpose, and we loved every second of it. Disco Demolition Night was not just a publicity stunt, it was a riot disguised as a baseball promotion. What began as a radio gag to blow up disco records in the middle of a Chicago White Sox game turned into chaos. Thousands stormed the field, fires burned, bats were stolen, the game was forfeited. But what happened that night was deeper than music. It was the sound of backlash. A backlash against disco, yes, but also against the communities that loved it. Against change, against color, against joy. Disco represented liberation. Gay clubs, black voices, women on the dance floor owning the beat. And in the summer of 1979, that scared some people. It was not just music under attack, it was people. The explosion on the field was a signal that joy had become too loud for some to tolerate. The explosion at Comiskey Park was not just about vinyl. It was about fear disguised as fun. The night left a crater, literal and cultural. Within a year, disco was pronounced dead. Radio stations changed formats. Record labels turned silent. But disco never died. It went underground. It evolved. It survived. Why do the loudest protests often come from those most afraid of the future? There was a time when stepping into a bathroom felt like diving into a bowl of guacamole. Avocado green tubs, harvest gold toilets, soft orange sinks. These were not mistakes. They were statements. In the 1960s and 1970s, these earthy tones were considered warm, grounded, and refreshingly modern. Designers took inspiration from nature and kitchens, believing that bathrooms should feel as inviting as any living space. But by the 1980s, that green started to resemble something less fresh, and the gold faded into a dull, outdated mustard. People began to regret their bold choices. New trends leaned toward beige, white, and chrome, colors that whispered clean rather than shouted retro. Remodels began to sweep these features away. Tubs were reglazed, sinks were replaced, and gold toilets were carted off to the dump. And yet, when someone today uncovers a perfectly preserved avocado bathroom, there is often a pause, a strange mix of laughter, admiration, and maybe even longing. These colors were part of a larger optimism, a time when people really believed they could color their homes into comfort. Love it or hate it, there was something fearless about a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a fruit salad. And that boldness is hard to forget. The 1970s conversation pit was the sunken living room trend that promised intimacy, a cool, modern flair, and space-saving elegance. You would step down into a cozy nest of shag carpet and low-slung cushions surrounded by walnut paneling and maybe even a built-in bar. It looked like something from a futuristic home magazine, the kind of place where you could host groovy parties or settle in for deep chats. But in practice, it was awkward, inconvenient, and kind of dangerous. People tripped, drinks spilled, kids fell. The novelty of a lowered living space wore off fast when people realized how hard it was to furnish and how easy it was to injure yourself. In the end, the only thing the conversation pit really sparked was a conversation about remodeling costs. And cleaning it? Imagine vacuuming stairs and crevices after every visit. As the decades wore on, what had once seemed bold and modern quickly felt dated and bizarre, like a relic of a dream that never quite worked. Real estate agents began referring to them as trip pits. Renovators filled them in. It turns out that deliberately building a hole into your living room is not the best long-term plan. And while conversation pits disappeared quietly, their colorful cousin in the kitchen refused to go without making a scene. Mercury thermometers were a household staple, used on babies, adults, even pets. Tucked in bathroom drawers or first aid kits, they were slim, silver, and dangerously beautiful. If you were sick, your mom would shake the thermometer to reset the mercury, then slide it under your tongue or arm. You waited in silence, watching the silvery liquid rise and hold its place. Nobody questioned it. It was science. It was routine. But those thermometers were filled with mercury, a potent neurotoxin that could poison the air if the glass broke, and they often did. A slip from the counter or a hard shake could send beads of mercury rolling across the floor like tiny balls of doom. Most families wiped them up with tissues or brooms, unaware of the harm. Today, mercury thermometers have been almost entirely phased out, replaced by digital ones that beep instead of shimmer. But for kids of the 80s, that little glass stick was part of every fever, every flu, every call to grandma for what to do next. And just like nobody questioned the mercury, nobody questioned mixing alcohol with open water, especially when summer meant floating down a river without a care in the world. They were supposed to be cozy, a small portable hammock for lounging in the backyard, reading comics, or daydreaming under a tree. The Hang 10 mini hammock seemed like the perfect escape, but it came with a terrifying flaw. It had no spreader bars, those wooden rods that keep a hammock open. Without them, the fabric would twist, fold, and tighten like a noose the moment someone lost their balance. And that is exactly what started happening. Children would climb in, relax for a second, then roll and get tangled, badly. Some fell and hit the ground, others got trapped inside the folds. The worst cases were far more tragic. What made it worse was how unassuming it looked. Just some cloth and rope, a harmless afternoon gift, until it became the most dangerous item in your yard. Recalls followed, but for some families, it was too late. The mini hammock left scars, not just physical ones, but emotional ones too. It reminded everyone that comfort can be a lie and that danger does not always roar. Sometimes it just sways gently in the breeze. Wood paneling was the heartbeat of 1970s interior design. Thick, dark slabs lined walls from floor to ceiling, turning dens and basements into cabins, even if you were 3 miles from the nearest tree. It was not about brightness. It was about mood. Homes felt earthy, lived in, safe. You could sit against it, lean back, and feel like you were somewhere older, warmer, and far from the buzzing world outside. Wood paneling was in rec rooms, behind television sets, next to ceramic owls and beanbag chairs. There was a hush to those rooms, like they swallowed noise and kept secrets. Even the creaks in the floor sounded softer next to those dark wood walls. It became the backdrop to childhoods, to birthdays, to tired parents sipping instant coffee on padded bar stools. Over time, people painted over it, ripped it down, called it outdated. But the feeling stayed, the nostalgia, the smell, that unique acoustics of a room where every wall softened the sound. It was not fancy, it was not minimalist, but it was home. Why did we trade such warmth for blank walls and cold white light? It felt glamorous the moment you saw it. A tub built directly into the floor, surrounded by shag carpet, wall mirrors, and maybe a velvet step stool for good measure. Sunken bathtubs were the luxury trend of the 1970s, equal parts spa and movie set. You did not climb into them. You descended. And once inside, you could stretch out under low lighting and pretend you were in a Hollywood dream. But reality hit fast. These tubs were a pain to clean. They collected dust and mildew in every corner. Getting out was a full-body challenge, and one slip on a damp floor could turn elegance into an emergency. As trends changed and safety took priority, the sunken tub quietly faded from new builds. But remnants remain in homes that have not been updated since the disco era. There is something oddly romantic about seeing one today, even if it no longer works. A quiet echo of a time when style mattered more than function, when even a bath could be an experience. And while few people would install one now, they still capture a strange kind of magic. A reminder that once, your tub was not just a necessity, it was a destination. Teachers paddling students in school was not a scandal, it was school policy. Across much of the South and Midwest, corporal punishment was written directly into the student handbook. You misbehaved and you got a warning. Do it again, and you were sent to the hallway or the principal's office, where a thick wooden paddle waited behind the door. The ritual was matter-of-fact. Bending over, hands on your knees, 3 quick swats. Then back to class. It was not seen as abuse, it was called discipline. Parents usually sided with the school. Some even thanked the teacher. You might remember classmates whispering about who got licks that week, or seeing a boy walk back into the room red-faced and silent. Today, physical punishment in schools is banned in a majority of states, with strict protections in place for student rights and well-being. What once passed as character building is now considered physical harm. But in the 1980s, teachers held power that reached beyond textbooks. And if kids were being punished like adults, it is no surprise that they were also being treated like adults in other dangerous ways, like riding up front in moving vehicles without a second thought. Pea gravel patios looked charming in home improvement magazines, rustic, effortless, a little slice of the French countryside dropped into a suburban backyard. But once they were installed, the reality quickly set in. These patios were nothing more than a layer of loose, sharp-edged stones that never stayed in place. Chairs sank into them, tables wobbled, and walking barefoot was out of the question unless you had calluses like leather. Every breeze sent pebbles scattering into the grass, and lawnmowers did not take kindly to rogue gravel. Kids hated playing on it. pets tracked it indoors, and any kind of sweeping or raking turned into a full-blown yard battle. Even worse, the so-called drainage benefits rarely worked out, leaving the area soggy in winter and scorched in summer. Within a year, most patios looked patchy and uneven, like a poorly maintained construction site rather than a space for relaxation. Homeowners tried tamping the gravel down, adding edging, even gluing it in place, but nothing made it better. It was a great idea in theory, undone by the simplest problem: gravel rolls and people fall. Still, even inside the house, that same mix of fashion and frustration kept showing up, especially in the form of a curtain that was not quite a wall and not quite anything useful at all. It looked adorable. Pastel mobiles dangling overhead, ribbons tied to rails, soft plush bumpers lining the crib like a cozy cloud. But in the 1980s, many of these crib decorations were quietly, tragically dangerous. The problem was not the intention, it was the design. Decorative cords hung too low, bumper pads restricted airflow. Some mobiles had small parts that broke off. Infants were left tangled, trapped, or struggling to breathe. It happened fast. A nap turned into silence. A peaceful room became a scene of unthinkable loss. The Consumer Product Safety Commission began issuing warnings, but they were often ignored or missed. Parents wanted their nurseries to look like the catalogs. Safety took a backseat to appearance. The tragedy was not just in the accidents, it was in the illusion of security. These products were sold in trusted stores. They were marketed with smiling babies and promises of rest. No one expected harm to come from something so innocent. But the statistics climbed. Sudden infant death syndrome cases were studied. Links were made, recalls followed, new standards were drafted. But for the families who lost everything, those changes came far too late. Unsafe crib decorations remind us that love sometimes needs better instructions, and that even the softest things can have sharp consequences. Pet rocks were the most absurd, brilliant, and completely sincere product of the 1970s. Imagine walking into a store and buying a rock. Not a toy that looked like a rock, an actual rock. And not just that, your new pet came in a box with straw bedding and a care manual. In a world spiraling through inflation, war, and cultural tension, Americans collectively decided to laugh. And they laughed by adopting a rock. The genius was not the object, but the moment. It was a wink to consumerism, a joke played perfectly straight. And yet, for some children, it became real. It was the kind of gag that somehow turned genuine, because it gave kids something stable in a world that felt anything but. For some families, it was the only pet they could afford. They named their rocks. They brought them to school. They carried them in pockets like loyal companions. Pet rocks sold by the millions. For a few dollars, you bought not just the item, but the idea that maybe life did not need to be so serious. Maybe in a world of chaos, you could still find control in something that literally never moved. They vanished as quickly as they arrived, leaving behind nothing but confused memories and collectors with original boxes. Why did something so silly feel like the most comforting purchase of the decade? They looked like nothing. A tiny slit in the back of the medicine cabinet, sometimes labeled, sometimes not. But mid-century homeowners knew exactly what it was for. Used razor blades. Back when razors were made of metal and designed to be replaced regularly, you could not toss them in the trash without risking someone's fingers. So you dropped them into the wall instead, one by one, forever. Builders thought they were doing something smart, safe disposal with no mess. But over time, those tiny drops added up. Home renovators have opened walls and found literal piles of old blades resting silently between the studs, untouched for 50 years. Today, the idea seems insane. But it was once standard practice. The slot was clean, tidy, out of sight. It solved a problem without really thinking about the future. And now, those future walls are filled with yesterday's solutions. The blade slot reminds us that even the safest seeming features can have a hidden cost. That behind every smooth bathroom wall, there might be a quiet collection of rusting metal, forgotten by everyone except the house itself. Letting kids roam the neighborhood alone was not just common in the 1980s, it was encouraged. Children would vanish after breakfast with a bike, a baseball glove, or just their imagination, and no one blinked an eye. They played near rivers, railroad tracks, junkyards, and alleys. They climbed trees and empty lots, chased each other through sprinkler-soaked lawns, and explored storm drains without ever considering the danger. No cell phones, no GPS. Just a promise to be back before dark, maybe. You followed the smell of backyard barbecue or the jingle of the ice cream truck to know where everyone had gathered. The streets raised them. Strangers were just people you had not met yet. The rule was simple. Stay together, watch out for your younger sibling, and come home when the porch lights came on. Parents trusted the neighborhood, and the neighborhood often looked out for them. There was an unspoken safety net woven through the community, invisible but strong. But today, letting a 10-year-old walk to the park alone can spark a visit from child services. Some parents have even faced legal charges for giving their kids the same freedom they once enjoyed. What was once viewed as independence is now labeled negligence. The culture of watchful fear has replaced the freedom of wandering youth. But if that sounds unsettling, it is nothing compared to what used to happen behind the wheel, while kids were in the back seat. The ads promised freedom, long-lasting comfort, peace of mind. What they delivered in some cases was something far more dangerous. In the 1980s, a new wave of super-absorbent tampons flooded the market. The idea was simple: make a product that could be worn longer without needing to change it, but science had not caught up with the marketing. These tampons created the perfect storm for toxic shock syndrome, a rare, fast-moving bacterial infection that could turn deadly in just hours. Women started getting sick, very sick, high fevers, vomiting, dizziness. The product was supposed to liberate women. Instead, it became a silent killer. Lawsuits followed, congressional hearings, recalls. But even today, the scars of that era remain. Women were taught to fear something that was supposed to help them. Trust was shattered, confidence in health brands eroded, and all because safety took a backseat to profit and convenience. The lesson was brutal. If something seems too good to be true, especially when it comes to your body, it probably is. Soul Train was not just a television show. It was a movement in motion, and every Saturday morning, it danced straight through your living room. It did not matter where you lived or what you had. If you turned on the television and saw that bright, kaleidoscopic set and heard the beat drop, you were part of something electric. It brought soul, funk, disco, and joy into millions of homes, giving Black culture the spotlight it long deserved. The fashion was wild and beautiful. The dancers were bold and free. It was not choreographed. It was felt. Soul Train lines were legendary because they turned the spotlight on the everyday person. It was joy on tape, beamed straight into a nation that often forgot how good it felt to dance. Even the silence after an episode ended felt louder somehow. Anyone with the courage to move could step forward. It gave kids in small towns the chance to see a world bigger, louder, and more alive than anything they had known. For many, it was the first time they saw themselves reflected on screen, not just as background but as the show. Now, it is tucked away in archives, replaced by algorithm-fed clips and sterile edits. But once, it was pure. Once, it was fire. And once, it told a generation, you matter, and your rhythm belongs. What happens when the music that moved a generation fades into silence? At the time, it made perfect sense. Why step onto a cold tile floor in the middle of winter when you could sink your feet into soft wall-to-wall carpet? Carpeted bathrooms were the height of comfort in the 1970s and 1980s. Homes leaned into the cozy trend with colors like dusty rose, deep sea foam, or even chocolate brown. It was all about luxury on a budget, turning the bathroom into a spa-like retreat where even your toes felt pampered. But the dream did not last long. Carpet and moisture were never meant to be friends. Wet footprints, overflowing tubs, and steamy showers turned that plush carpet into a breeding ground for mildew. Shampoo spills left stains. Toilet leaks became dark, soggy secrets. Once people realized just how impossible it was to keep clean, the charm started to fade. Health officials and home renovation experts began to sound the alarm. Carpeting was ripped out, replaced with linoleum, tile, or anything that could be mopped and bleached. But for a generation of kids who remember brushing their teeth while their feet sank into a soft, shaggy floor, the memory sticks. It was warm, it was weird, and it was one of the strangest trends to ever take hold of the American bathroom. So tell us in the comments which of these 1990s normal moments you remember most. And if you enjoyed the trip back in time, like this video and subscribe so you never miss another memory worth reliving.